After 30 years on this bench, staring down at people from every corner of society, I genuinely believed I had human nature figured out. I thought I knew exactly what a person would do when no one was watching, especially when they were desperate and had nothing left to lose. I was wrong, completely and utterly wrong. One particular morning, a boy walked into my courtroom, not holding a parent's hand, not accompanied by a guardian. He came in escorted by a police officer wearing a jacket 3 sizes too large and sneakers wrapped in gray duct tape. He couldn't have been older than 10, and what he carried with him and what unfolded next permanently shifted. The way I see this world, it stopped me cold. I sat up there on my bench, a man who has presided over thousands of cases involving millions of dollars, and I felt a lump rise in my throat, me speechless. What this child did, and more importantly, how the wallet's owner responded, is a story I carry with me every single day. Before this video ends, you'll understand exactly why. But before I get into it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word. Let me tell you a little about my courtroom first, because it matters. I have served as a judge in this city for 3 decades. I have seen the absolute best of humanity and the absolute worst. Every morning I walk through those heavy oak doors carrying one belief: character is not defined by the balance in your bank account. Rich or poor, young or old, it doesn't matter what neighborhood raised you. My grandfather arrived in this country with nothing but a cardboard suitcase and a strong back. He worked the docks hauling crates through freezing rain. He used to tell me honesty is the only currency that never loses its value. I never forgot those words. I watched him struggle to keep the lights on, but he never once touched a dime that wasn't his. Watching him, I learned what real dignity actually looks like. Early in my career, I trained myself to look at the whole person standing before me, to ask, what is this person's life really like? What series of events brought them through these doors today? That morning was a Tuesday in November, bitterly cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes the entire city look gray and unforgiving. The docket was packed with routine matters, property disputes, minor infractions, standard stuff. Then the heavy wooden doors swung open and this boy walked in. His name was Leo. He had been sleeping in a subway station for 3 weeks. His hands were trembling partly from the cold, partly from fear, and held in those small freezing hands was a thick designer leather wallet. Inside that wallet was exactly $10,000 in crisp $100 bills. Let me ask you something right now. Be honest with yourself. If you hadn't eaten a warm meal in 3 days, if you were sleeping on concrete and found $10,000 in cash on a freezing sidewalk, what would you do? Leave me a comment below. I actually read them about an hour into the morning session. My clerk called the matter forward. Now I need you to understand, this was not a criminal trial for the boy. The police had brought Leo in because the wallet's owner had filed a frantic report claiming he had been robbed when officers found Leo near the transit station with the wallet still in his hands. They brought him directly to my courtroom to establish the truth on the record. I looked out at the gallery, and that's when I saw the owner. His name was Richard Sterling, a prominent local real estate developer. You know the type. He walked up to the front of my courtroom like he personally owned the building, wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, phone in hand, aggressively typing out emails, barely acknowledging the trembling child standing just a few feet away. I reviewed the police report. Officer Miller, an honest cop I've known for years, stood beside Leo and testified that they found the boy sitting beneath a street lamp in the freezing rain. He had not spent a single dollar, not one. He hadn't even bought a piece of bread, and I could literally watch his shoulders shake through that oversized jacket. He had simply been waiting for a patrol car to pass so he could hand it over. I looked down from my bench at Mr. Sterling. I said, Mr. Sterling, this child found your wallet on the street and waited in the freezing cold to make sure it was safely returned to law enforcement. And you know what this man did? He didn't say thank you. He didn't even glance at the boy's face. He stepped forward, snatched the leather wallet off the clerk's table, and immediately began counting the $100 bills one by one, right there in my courtroom, licking his thumb, flipping through the cash, eyes narrowed like he fully expected the starving 10-year-old to be a common thief. I let the silence sit. I have learned over 30 years that silence is one of the most powerful tools now, and go sit in the front row of the gallery. Do not speak. Do not check your phone, because this court is not dismissed, and I am certainly not finished with you. He blinked, visibly startled that someone was finally telling him no. He bristled and opened his mouth to argue, but he saw the look on my face. 30 years on this bench gives you a look that doesn't invite debate. He snatched up his bill and sat down fuming. I turned my full attention back to the boy. I softened my voice. Leo, I said gently, step a little closer to the bench, son. He shuffled forward, pulling the oversized jacket tighter around himself. I leaned down and asked him the question that had been burning in my mind since he first walked through those doors. Leo, why didn't you keep it? Nobody would have known. You could have bought yourself a warm bed, new shoes, food for months. Why did you stand in the freezing rain to give it back? And what this starving child said to me next broke my heart wide open and put it back together all at once. Leo looked up at me. His cheeks were hollow and his lips were cracked from the bitter winter wind. He didn't hesitate. He didn't need to think about his answer because the truth was already living right there in his heart. My Mom got very sick last year, Honor. Before she passed away, she held my hand and told me something I promised I'd never forget. His voice was small, but it carried across that completely silent courtroom like a bell. She said, Leo, we might not always have a warm bed and our stomachs might be empty sometimes, but we have our name. And the moment you take something that doesn't belong to you, you lose the only thing you truly own. I had to pause. I just had to pause and let those words settle. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes. Anyone who's watched this courtroom regularly knows that gesture. It means something has reached me somewhere deep. I looked at this 10-year-old boy swallowed up by a jacket twice his size, and I saw a king, a child who possessed a wealth of character that all the money in Richard Sterling's bank accounts could never purchase. The gallery was completely still. I saw grown men, attorneys who argue hard, bitter cases every single day, quietly wiping their eyes, but the story doesn't end there because while every eye in that room was on Leo, Officer Miller stepped up to my bench. He leaned in close, his expression dead serious. Your Honor, Miller whispered, passing me a small clear evidence bag when we were inventorying the wallet at the precinct to establish identification. We found the cash, but we also found this tucked inside a hidden zipper compartment. Mr. Sterling practically threatened to have my badge when I told him it had to be logged into evidence before being released. I looked down at the clear plastic bag. Inside was a small black USB flash drive and a folded piece of heavy parchment paper covered in handwritten numbers. I glanced over at Richard Sterling sitting in the front row. The arrogance had drained completely from his face. The color had left his cheeks entirely. His hands were gripping the wooden bench in front of him. He wasn't looking at the $10,000 anymore. He was staring at that small plastic bag like it was a loaded weapon pointed directly at him, and that's when I understood. This man was not in a hurry because he wanted his money back. He was in a panic because a homeless 10-year-old boy had accidentally stumbled onto a secret that was about to bring an entire empire crashing down. Let me ask you this. Do you believe? The universe has a way of balancing the scales of justice when we least expect it. Tell me in the comments. I have watched people receive devastating news in this courtroom for 30 years. I have witnessed the exact moment when someone who believed they were entirely in control realizes they are not. But I want you to understand how complete this transformation was. One moment, Richard Sterling had been standing there in his expensive suit, treating my courtroom like a brief, annoying errand. He had tossed a $20 bill at a starving child like he was throwing scraps to a stray dog. Then, in the time it took Officer Miller to hand me that plastic evidence bag, Sterling became someone else entirely. The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might pass out. His hands, the same hands that had been casually scrolling his phone and pinching that $20 bill, began to shake. He rose from the front row. Your Honor, he said, and his voice was entirely different now. The confidence was gone, completely gone. Your Honor, that is private, privileged property. I demand that wallet and all its contents be returned to me immediately. I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. I looked at him. I let the silence stretch. Mr. Sterling, I said quietly, you may know the mayor, you may know the chief of police, but right now you are standing in my courtroom. And in my courtroom, the law does not bend for bank accounts, and it certainly does not care who you have on speed dial. I put on my glasses and unfolded the heavy parchment paper from that hidden zipper compartment. I am not a fast reader by accident. I am a deliberate reader. I want every word, every number tool, and exactly where it is meant to land. As my eyes moved across the page, the air left the room. It was a ledger, a handwritten ledger of payoffs, kickbacks, and shell companies, names of city officials, zoning board members, and building inspectors, millions of dollars illegally funneled to push through his luxury real estate developments while cutting critical safety corners. The black flash drive, I could only assume, held the digital evidence of every single transaction. Sterling lunged forward, his voice rising to a panicked shout. That boy stole that from me. He tampered with it. He's a thief, Your Honor. I want him arrested right now. I looked from this panicked millionaire down to little Leo, who was clutching his oversized jacket, looking confused and terrified. A child who had refused to spend a single dollar of that $10,000 to feed his empty stomach, now being accused by a man who had stolen millions. Let me pause here for just a moment. Have you ever encountered someone so consumed by greed that they would destroy an innocent child simply to save themselves? Hit that like button if you're still with me, because what happened next is something I will never forget. I looked at Richard Sterling. I didn't raise my voice. When you have been doing this as long as I have, you understand that righteous anger doesn't need to be loud to be felt. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a blade. 10 minutes ago, you stood right where you are now, licked your thumb, and counted $10,000 in front of a starving child. You looked me in the eye and said, it's all here. But the moment this court discovers a ledger documenting your own criminal activity, suddenly this 10-year-old boy is a master thief who tampered with your hidden compartments. He opened his mouth. The words died in his throat. He scanned the gallery, searching for a friendly face, someone he had bought and paid for. There was no one. I looked over at Officer Miller. He had already quietly radioed for his captain. A man in a dark overcoat had just stepped through the double doors at the back of the gallery. His posture was still very deliberate, the kind of stillness that belongs to someone who knows exactly what they are doing. He walked forward, flashed a gold badge to the bailiff, and identified himself as an investigator with the State Anti-Corruption Task Force. They had been building a case against Richard Sterling's real estate firm for over a year, but they had never been able to locate the master ledger. They couldn't find the hard paper trail of the bribes. And here it was, delivered into the hands of justice by a boy who didn't even have a warm place to sleep. I watched the investigator approach Sterling. I watched handcuffs close around wrists accustomed to $1,000 watches. I watched that designer leather wallet, the one Sterling had valued more than a human life, sit completely abandoned on the defense table. I looked back down at Leo. He was shaking, tears welling in his big brown eyes, absolutely terrified that he was somehow in trouble. Leo, I said, making my voice as gentle as I possibly could. Look at me, son. He wiped his eyes with the frayed, dirty sleeve of his jacket and looked up at my bench. You are not in trouble, I told him, making certain every single person in that room heard every word. In fact, you just did something braver and more honest than most adults will manage in their entire lifetimes. That man tried to make you feel small with a $20 bill, but you, Leo, you just brought down a giant. I have to ask. You watching this right now, what do you think is more valuable? A wallet full of $100 bills or a mother's lesson about honesty? Hit that subscribe button if you believe character is priceless. The courtroom went quiet after they let him out, the kind of quiet that follows something truly significant. I sat on my bench for a moment and let it settle. I looked out at the gallery. People sat perfectly still, nodding slowly at one another, the way people do when they have just witnessed something that confirms what they needed to believe about justice. I watched the heavy wooden doors close behind Richard Sterling. Then I took a deep breath and I did something I almost never do. I stepped down from the bench. I walked right across the floor of my courtroom to where little Leo was standing in those duct tape shoes. I knelt down so I was completely eye level with him. His teeth were still chattering from the damp cold. I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, Leo, the law just took care of that man. Now we are going to take care of you. I looked back at Christina, my clerk. She was already on her phone coordinating with State Family Services for an emergency placement, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. Officer Miller didn't hesitate. He took off his own heavy fleece-lined department jacket and draped it across Leo's shaking shoulders. The jacket swallowed the boy completely, but for the first time that entire morning he stopped shivering. Then something remarkable happened. A defense attorney seated in the second row, a man who argues tough cases and bills at $1,000 an hour, quietly walked up to the clerk's desk and placed a $100 bill on the table. A young public defender stepped forward and added a 20. A woman who had only been in the building for a traffic ticket reached into her purse and handed Leo a brand new pair of wool gloves. Within 5 minutes, there was a pile of cash on that table for a hot meal and new clothes. You see, that is what happens when one person chooses to stand up for what is right. It creates a ripple. Leo's mother had left him with absolutely nothing. No money, no property, no trust fund. She left him sleeping in a subway station, but she left him with a lesson about honesty. And that single lesson was powerful enough to wake up an entire room full of hardened adults, powerful enough to remind us all what humanity actually looks like. Let me ask you this. How often do we underestimate the power of a single act of integrity? How often do we convince ourselves that our small choices don't really matter? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, but Leo's story does not end in that courtroom with a warm jacket and a hot meal. What happened to him 1 year later after the dust had settled and the headlines had faded? That is the part of the story that still brings tears to my eyes. 1 year after that freezing November morning, Richard Sterling's real estate empire had completely collapsed. Using the evidence from that black flash drive and the handwritten ledger, the corrupt city officials were brought to trial. Millions of dollars in stolen. Public funds were recovered and returned to the city. Sterling is currently serving a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. He once had all the money in the world, but in the end he lost the only things that truly matter, his freedom and his dignity. But that is not the most important part of this story. A few months ago, the heavy wooden doors of my courtroom opened once more. Officer Miller walked in, but he wasn't in uniform. He was in plain clothes, walking alongside his wife and holding their hands. Walking tall with a bright, confident smile on his face was little Leo. He wasn't wearing an oversized, dirty jacket. He wasn't wearing sneakers held together by duct tape. His eyes held the deep, quiet peace of a child who finally has a safe, warm place to call home. Officer Miller and his wife had officially adopted him, and the lawyers, clerks, and ordinary citizens who were present in that courtroom on that fateful day had pooled their resources to establish a trust fund specifically for Leo's college education. Leo walked right up to my bench, grinning from ear to ear, and handed me a small handmade piece of paper. Inside, written in the careful, crooked letters of a 10-year-old boy, it read, "Thank you for believing me, Judge. My mom in heaven is really proud." I placed that card on my desk right beside the photograph of my grandfather. It serves as a daily reminder to me and to every person who walks through those doors of one eternal truth. Money can buy custom suits, it can buy privilege, power, and access, but it cannot buy character, and it absolutely cannot purchase the legacy of pure integrity that a struggling mother left for her son. Honesty is not a luxury. It is a beacon that shines the brightest in our most desperate moments. Leo didn't just return $10,000 that day. He returned our faith in humanity. So let me ask you one final question before we go. If you are ever faced with a difficult choice between doing what is right and taking an easier, darker path, who will you? Remember? The powerful millionaire with a thick leather wallet or the homeless orphan in the duct tape shoes? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to read them. If Leo's story touched your heart, hit that like button and share this video with someone you love. Don't forget to subscribe to keep joining me for these stories of justice, respect, and what truly matters in this life.